Welcome to 221B Stories, where every story invites you into a world of secrets and surprises. Grab your coffee, stay curious, and share the thrill with fellow mystery lovers. Let's get started. Sherlock Holmes, the man who saw his own ghost before he was murdered. Chapter 1. London's ever-present fog clung to the gaslit streets, curling around lampposts like a living thing. The city, restless and murky, carried with it an air of suppressed whispers and secrets yet to be unearthed. It was on such a night, one of peculiar silence and unease, that I found myself in our familiar sitting room at 221B Baker Street, watching Sherlock Holmes pace before the hearth with an unreadable expression. The firelight flickered across his lean, angular face, his sharp features etched with deep contemplation. He held a letter in his fingers, though not with the casual grip of an ordinary correspondence. No, he studied it as a physician might examine an ailment he had never before encountered. I cleared my throat. "Holmes, you have been silent for the better part of an hour. I presume that letter is of some interest?" Holmes halted mid-stride, his piercing eyes snapping toward me. "Interest, Watson? No, not interest. This letter is an impossibility." A chill ran through me at his tone. Holmes was not one to engage in hyperbole. I leaned forward in my chair. "How so?" He flicked the envelope toward me, and I caught it deftly. The parchment was heavy, embossed with a seal that had been cracked open, a symbol that I did not recognize. The writing, elegant yet oddly rushed, bore a single name in its salutation: Mr. Sherlock Holmes. If you are reading this, then I am already dead, and yet I have seen myself die. My grip tightened on the paper. "A prank?" I suggested, though my voice lacked conviction. Holmes shook his head, his expression unreadable. "Continue." I scanned the rest of the letter, my pulse quickening. "Mr. Holmes, I write to you not as a man seeking protection, nor as one who clings to the hope of justice. I write because you are the only mind capable of comprehending what I am about to confess. 1 week ago, I saw my own ghost. Not a spectral trick of the mind, nor an illusion of light and shadow, but myself, my own face, my own body, my own voice. And this apparition, this second version of myself, whispered only one thing: prepare for your murder. I do not know who wishes me dead, nor why, only that it will happen, and when it does, no one will remember that I ever lived. By the time this reaches you, it may already be too late. Should you wish to uncover the truth, come at once to Carroll House, Briar Lane, Whitechapel, but do so with caution, for I believe reality itself is being undone. Sincerely, Mr. Edwin Vallance. I lowered the letter, feeling an inexplicable unease settle in my chest. Holmes, this is nonsense. A man cannot see his own ghost, and the notion that his death would erase him entirely, it is preposterous. Holmes did not respond immediately. He stood by the fire, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his mind undoubtedly racing through possibilities that had not yet revealed themselves to me. "Watson," he finally said, his voice measured, "tell me, have you ever heard the name Edwin Vallance before?" I frowned. "No, I do not believe I have." Holmes nodded. "Nor has Lestrade, nor has any record at Scotland Yard, nor indeed Does any registry in all of London acknowledge the existence of an Edwin Vallance? A shiver traced the length of my spine. Surely you do not mean— I mean, Holmes interrupted, his gaze dark, that the man who wrote this letter does not exist. A silence hung between us, heavy and suffocating. Then, with a decisive motion, Holmes snatched his coat from the rack. "We leave at once, Watson." "To Whitechapel." "To Carroll House," he corrected, "if, of course, it truly exists." I rose from my chair, hastily donning my coat, though my fingers felt clumsy against the buttons. As we stepped into the cold, suffocating fog of London, I could not shake the sensation that we were walking towards something we had no right to. No, before moving to the next chapter, let us know where you are watching from, and if you love stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another incredible story waiting for you. Chapter 2. The streets of Whitechapel stretched before us, cloaked in a fog so thick it seemed to swallow the gaslight whole. The damp cobblestones echoed under our hurried steps, and as we neared Briar Lane, a distinct unease settled upon me. Holmes, ever the embodiment of composure, walked with measured determination. His sharp gaze flicked from shadow to shadow, assessing every alleyway, every silhouette that lurked beyond the mist. "Holmes?" I muttered, adjusting my scarf against the cold. "This Vallance fellow. If he does not exist, then who wrote the letter?" Holmes did not look at me as he replied. "That, Watson, is precisely what we must determine." We turned onto Briar Lane, a narrow, crooked street lined with dilapidated buildings. The air smelled of damp stone and stagnant water, the kind of place where crime festered in silence. And yet, as I glanced around, my unease only deepened. Something felt off, wrong. I struggled to place it at first, but as Holmes slowed his pace, I saw that he too had noticed. There were no signs of life, not a single pedestrian, not a carriage, no light seeping through the cracked windows of the buildings. The entire street felt abandoned. And yet there was no indication of recent desertion, no boarded doors, no scattered debris. Only silence, as if the very air had forgotten how to carry sound. Holmes halted before an iron-wrought gate, his expression unreadable. Carroll House. I followed his gaze. The house loomed before us, an old Georgian structure of darkened brick, its windows like hollow eyes, staring into the void. It stood precisely where Vallance had instructed, yet something in my mind recoiled, whispering that it should not be there. Holmes touched the gate. The metal was warm. I frowned. Warm? In this cold? Holmes said nothing, only gave the gate a measured push. It creaked open without resistance, revealing an overgrown pathway leading to the front door. I hesitated, glancing back toward the street. "Holmes, does something feel strange to you?" He turned to me, his gaze sharp. "Describe it." I struggled to put the sensation into words. The buildings, the empty street, the absence of anything that made Whitechapel Whitechapel. It was as if Briar Lane had been plucked from the world and left suspended in some in-between place. "Tune, as though this street is forgotten," I admitted. Holmes studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. You are beginning to see it." "See what? That which should not exist?" he murmured. A chill crawled up my spine. "Holmes, do you believe this house is real?" Holmes turned back to Carroll House. "That depends, Watson. Real to whom?" Before I could press him further, he reached for the door. It was unlocked. With a final glance toward the street behind us, he pushed it open. The darkness inside swallowed us whole. Chapter 3. The door swung inward with the weight of forgotten time, its hinges whispering secrets into the stagnant air. The moment we crossed the threshold, a peculiar sensation seized me. A faint pressure, as if the very act of stepping inside had disrupted something fragile and unseen. Holmes moved with practiced precision, his gaze sweeping across the dimly lit hallway. The house smelled of damp wood and something else, something harder to define, a scent that did not belong. "Do you feel it, Watson?" he murmured. I hesitated. "Feel what?" "The displacement," he said almost absently. "A sensation as if the house itself is adjusting to our presence." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words died in my throat. There was something profoundly wrong about this place. The walls, though seemingly intact, bore an unnatural stillness. The air lacked the scent of dust or decay one might expect from an abandoned home. The corridor stretched ahead of us in eerie symmetry, lined with doors that led to unknown chambers. Holmes reached into his coat and withdrew a small lantern. With a flick of his wrist, the light bloomed, casting long, shifting shadows that made the space feel even more distorted. The letter mentioned a man who saw his own ghost. I muttered, as much to ground myself as to break the unnatural silence. Perhaps Vallance suffered from delusions. Perhaps, Holmes agreed, though his tone carried no conviction. We moved deeper into the house, our footsteps absorbed by thick carpets that muffled sound. The hallway seemed unnaturally long, as if the house had expanded in our absence of attention. I stole a glance behind me, only to find that the doorway through which we had entered was no longer visible. I stopped in my tracks. "Holmes, where is the door?" He turned, his keen gaze following mine. His eyes narrowed. "It was here," I insisted, my voice barely above a whisper. "The entrance, I am aware of its prior location." Holmes interrupted, his tone clipped. "The question is, Watson, was it ever truly there?" A tremor of unease coursed through me. I had no patience for riddles, not now. "Surely, you don't mean to suggest that we imagined—" "I suggest nothing yet," he said, "but I am observing." Holmes stepped forward, trailing his fingers along the wall where the door should have been. His brow furrowed. No dust, no indentations, as if no door had ever existed at all. A chill slithered through me. Before I could respond, a noise echoed from the end of the corridor. A single, measured footstep. We were not alone. Holmes extinguished the lantern at once, plunging us into darkness. "Watson," he whispered, "do not speak." We stood frozen in the silent abyss of Carroll House, the void pressing in around us. Then another step, closer this time, deliberate. I strained my ears, my hand moving instinctively to my revolver. The weight of it in my pocket was reassuring, though I had no certainty it would serve us against whatever force had rewritten the very architecture of this house. A breath, ragged and unnatural, issued from the darkness ahead. Holmes tensed beside me. Then, a whisper, "You should not have come." I felt my blood run cold. The voice was not human. Chapter 4. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating, as though the very air had conspired to steal all sound. Holmes remained perfectly still beside me, his breathing controlled, his focus absolute. My own pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out everything else. The whisper, that unnatural voice, had come from somewhere ahead, yet the darkness betrayed no shape, no presence. My grip tightened around the revolver in my coat pocket, though I dared not draw it, not yet. Holmes's hand brushed my sleeve, a silent command to hold my ground. Then another sound, not footsteps this time, but the slow creak of a door opening. Holmes moved first, stepping forward with an eerie calmness that made my own hesitation feel cowardly by comparison. I followed, the hairs on my neck prickling with every step. The corridor ahead should have been a straight path, but as we moved, the shadows revealed a new door, one that had not been there before. I swallowed hard. Holmes, I swear that door was not there a moment ago, he finished. Yes, I am aware. We reached the threshold. Holmes raised a cautious hand, pressing his fingers lightly against the wood. The surface was cold, unnaturally so, as though untouched by time or warmth. Then, from behind the door, a breath, not ours. Holmes did not hesitate. In one smooth motion, he pushed the door open. Inside, the lantern's glow revealed a small study, furnished but abandoned, as though its occupant had left in a hurry. A desk, an armchair, bookshelves laden with aged tomes. And in the centre of the room, half illuminated by the flickering light, stood a single chair. Someone was sitting in it, or rather, had been. The figure slumped forward, motionless. The dim glow of our lantern caught the gleam of something wet, blood staining the front of his shirt. I stepped forward, my instincts as a doctor taking over, but as I neared, my breath caught in my throat. The man's face, the pale, lifeless face of Edwin Vallance. Holmes, too, had moved to inspect the body, his expression unreadable. He pressed 2 fingers to the man's throat, holding them there for a beat before, withdrawing. "Dead," he murmured, "though not recently." A tremor ran through me. Not recently. But Holmes, if this is Vallance, then how did he send the letter? Holmes did not answer at once. His eyes scanned the desk, where several sheets of parchment lay scattered, inkpots overturned. Some of the pages bore frantic, half-finished sentences, scratched out with violent urgency. Holmes lifted a page, his gaze darkening as he read. He passed it to me without a word. I took it, my fingers trembling slightly as I read the words scrawled in desperation. "If you find this, know that I was never meant to exist." They are watching. They know I remember. I saw myself die. I watched my own body fall. Reality is unthreading. Do not trust your memories. The last line was smudged, as if the writer's hand had trembled violently. I swallowed hard. "Hey, Holmes, what is this?" For the first time I saw something in his expression that unnerved me. Not fear, but something close. "Watson," he said quietly, "look again." I turned my gaze back to the corpse of Edwin Vallance, and my blood turned to ice. The chair was empty. Chapter 5a. Soundless dread gripped me as I stared at the chair where Edwin Vallance had been, where his corpse had been, only moments ago. Now the chair was empty. Holmes stood motionless beside me, his keen eyes locked onto the space where the body had been. His expression was unreadable, but I had known him long enough to recognize the rare occasions when something unsettled him. "Holmes," I whispered, my throat dry. "You saw him, didn't you?" For several long seconds he did not respond. Then, in a voice as controlled as ever, he said, "I saw what was meant to be seen." That answer, infuriatingly cryptic as it was, sent another shiver through me. My instincts as a doctor rebelled against the impossibility before me. A body cannot simply cease to be. There must be an explanation, a trick of the light, a concealed passage, something. I moved forward, touching the chair, half expecting to find it still warm from the body that had been there. It was cold, lifeless, as though Vallance had never been there at all. Holmes, ever methodical, circled the room. His fingers traced the edges of the bookshelf, the mantel, the wallpaper. I could see his mind working, his deductions assembling into patterns I could not yet grasp. He swallowed against the creeping dread in my chest. "Holmes, what are we dealing with?" He did not immediately answer. Instead, he crouched near the desk, running his fingers across the unfinished letter Vallance had written. A smudge of ink streaked the page, as though the writer's hand had trembled before completing his thought. Holmes's gaze flicked back to the chair, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Tell me, Watson," he said, "what do you remember of Vallance?" I blinked. "We read his letter. We came here to find him. We saw his—" I hesitated. "We saw his body, didn't we?" A sudden ghastly uncertainty took hold of me. The memory of Vallance's corpse was vivid, his lifeless features, the blood-stained shirt, and yet when I tried to recall his face in detail, something was missing. It was like grasping at smoke. The more I tried to picture him, the less certain I became that I had ever seen him at all. A cold sweat broke across my skin. "Holmes, what is happening to me?" Holmes exhaled slowly. "You are experiencing the first effects of manipulation." "Manipulation?" I repeated. "You think someone is controlling our perceptions?" Holmes tapped the unfinished letter with a single finger. "Vallance wrote, 'Do not trust your memories.' That was not a metaphor, Watson. It was a warning." I gripped the back of the chair, steadying myself. "But that would mean—" "That reality is not as immutable as we believe." Silence filled the room. Then, from somewhere within the house, a door creaked open. We both turned sharply. Holmes's gaze darkened. Without a word, he crossed the room and extinguished the lantern. The study plunged into darkness, save for the thin slivers of moonlight filtering through the dusty window. I drew my revolver, my heart pounding. A slow, deliberate footstep echoed from the hallway beyond. Then another. Holmes motioned for me to stay silent. We stood, breathless, listening. A third step. Closer. The sound of someone or something moving toward us. And then a voice, faint, distant, impossible. "Dr. Watson, why did you leave me?" The blood in my veins turned to ice. Because I knew that voice. It was mine. Chapter 6. The voice sent a terrible, unnatural chill through me. It was mine, my own voice, distorted, distant, yet unmistakable. Holmes remained still, his expression unreadable, in the dim moonlight filtering through the window. But I knew him well enough to recognize the rigid alertness in his posture, the slight tilt of his head as he analyzed the impossible. Another step echoed in the hallway, then another. A figure, a shadow, stirred beyond the doorway, just out of sight. My grip on the revolver tightened, my pulse hammering against my ribs. Holmes raised a hand in a silent command. "Wait!" I swallowed hard, forcing myself to remain still. A whisper, threading through the darkness, reached us. "You left me here. Doctor, don't you remember?" My stomach twisted violently. The voice was clearer now, no longer just an echo of my own, but as if someone, somewhere, had peeled my words from another moment in time and sent them crawling back to me. Holmes stepped forward, his voice a razor in the silence. "Who are you?" No response. Then a sudden movement. The shadow beyond the door lurched forward, and I caught a glimpse of it, a figure in the dimness, moving with unnatural stillness, its form flickering like a lantern about to go out. My own silhouette, my breath strangled in, my throat. I could not move. Holmes, however, acted without hesitation. In one fluid motion, he struck a match, the brief burst of flame cutting through the darkness. For a fraction of a second, just long enough to glimpse the impossible, I saw myself standing in the doorway. My face, my eyes, my own expression mirroring my horror back at me. And then it was gone. The match burned down to Holmes's fingertips. He did not flinch as he extinguished it with a flick. The silence returned. I stumbled backward, gripping the desk for balance. The rational part of my mind warred against what I had just witnessed. This could not be. Holmes turned to me, his gaze sharp and measured. "Watson." I swallowed against the dryness in my throat. What in God's name did I just see? Eames did not immediately answer. His gaze flicked to the empty doorway, as if considering something beyond my comprehension. Then he said very calmly, "We are being rewritten." The weight of his words settled on my chest like a suffocating fog. Shook my head. "Rewritten? Holmes, this is madness. You are suggesting what? That our very existence is being altered?" Holmes exhaled slowly, folding his hands behind his back. "Watson, consider this. When we arrived at Carroll House, what did we find?" I forced my thoughts into order. A corpse. Edwin Vallance. He was dead, sitting in that chair. Was he? Holmes pressed. The question made me falter. My memory, once clear, now wavered. I remembered Valance's lifeless form, the blood-stained shirt, the expression frozen in death. But the details were slipping. I could no longer picture the precise shade of his hair, the exact placement of his body, the certainty of it. Holmes studied my face. "You are beginning to understand." I gripped the desk harder. "Holmes, what if—" Before I could finish, the room around us shifted, the walls flickered, the shadows bent unnaturally. The very structure of Carroll House seemed to ripple, as if reality itself had taken a breath. Then a sound. Not footsteps this time, not a whisper, but something worse. A single deliberate knock on the study door. Holmes turned his gaze toward it, and for the first time in our long years together, I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. Doubt, Chapter 7. The knock resounded through the study, a gaiety, singular, deliberate sound that sent a cold tremor through my bones. Holmes and I stood motionless, the flickering shadows from our dim lantern stretching across the walls like silent witnesses. No further sound followed. Holmes, his expression impassive, took a measured step toward the door. The very air around us felt heavier, as if some unseen force resisted movement. I found my voice, though it came out in a whisper. "Holmes, I don't think we should open it." He did not acknowledge my hesitation. His gloved fingers brushed the door's handle, but he did not turn it, not yet. Instead, he pressed his ear against the wood, listening. Silence. Then, so faintly, I barely heard it. A breath, not from Holmes, not from me. Something or someone was standing on the other side. Holmes straightened, his expression unreadable. "Who is there?" A long pause. Then the voice came. Soft, familiar, and entirely wrong. "Dr. Watson." My blood ran cold. Holmes turned his sharp gaze toward me, and for a fleeting moment I saw something unfamiliar in his eyes. Concern. Because the voice from the other side of the door was mine. I took an involuntary step backward, shaking my head. "No, that's impossible." Holmes pressed his fingers lightly against the wood. His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable steel beneath it. "What do you want?" Silence. Then another knock. Louder this time, insistent. Holmes inhaled, sharply, his mind racing. "Watson, describe to me exactly what you remember of the moment we entered this house." I blinked at the sudden question. "What?" "Tell me, what is your last clear memory before we stepped inside?" The question was absurd, and yet I tried to answer. I tried to recall the moment before we crossed the threshold, the exact sequence of events that had led us to this study. I remembered the letter, Edwin Valance's warning, the walk through Whitechapel, the sensation of something being wrong, but the precise moment before we entered Carroll House? It was missing. The realization hit me like a physical force. I clenched my fists, trying to will the memory back into existence, but it was not there. Holmes must have seen the recognition dawn on my face. He gave a single grim nod. Exactly. Another knock, more forceful now. Holmes turned back to the door, his voice low. "Watson, I suspect that if we open this door, we will see something neither of us are meant to witness." A deep unease settled in my chest. Then we should leave this room. Holmes did not respond immediately. He was weighing something in his mind, something I could not yet grasp. Then, at last, he stepped away from the door. But as he did, the study shifted. The walls bent inward, as though the very structure of the house was breathing. The lantern's glow flickered violently, and for the briefest of moments I saw shadows move where no shadows should be. And then the door burst open, the light extinguished. Darkness swallowed us whole, and from within it came the sound of something moving, something stepping into the room. Chapter 8. The darkness swallowed everything. A pressure built in the air, thick and suffocating, as if the very walls of Carroll House had inhaled, waiting for something unspeakable to emerge. The extinguished lantern left us in pitch black, but I felt the presence in the room. Something had stepped through the doorway. Holmes and I remained still. My grip on the revolver was iron tight, but I dared not move, dared not make a sound. The silence was not empty. It was full of something shifting, something observing. Then the whisper came. Watson, my name, spoken softly, with my own voice. I bit the inside of my cheek, grounding myself against the panic clawing its way up my spine. This could not be. This was madness, and yet it spoke again. Watson, do you remember? The voice was neither near nor far. It was everywhere, like the sound existed beyond the constraints of space itself. Holmes moved first. I heard the whisper of fabric as he shifted slightly, his breathing controlled, deliberate. You are attempting to unsettle us, he said, his voice steady. You will find it quite difficult. The presence did not answer him. Instead, the floor creaked to my left. Something was closer now. A shape materialized in the darkness. A silhouette barely distinguishable from the surrounding void. It stood just beyond the threshold of visibility, as if the very concept of its existence was tenuous. And then it took another step forward. The dim moonlight creeping through the window revealed a figure, and I stopped breathing, because I was looking at myself. Not a reflection, not a shadow, but a perfect, horrifying copy of me standing just a few paces away. Holmes did not flinch. His voice, sharp as a blade, cut through the unnatural silence. Imitation is a powerful tool of deception. But if you were truly Watson, you would tell me what case we last solved before coming here. The other Watson turned its head slightly. The motion was unnatural, like a marionette moved by invisible strings. Then it smiled. Not my smile. Not a human smile. Something too wide, too deliberate. I swallowed thickly, forcing my voice to remain steady. What are you? The thing blinked once, slowly. Then it whispered something so quiet I barely caught it. I am what remains. The air turned frigid. Holmes took a single step forward, his eyes locked onto the figure. And what precisely does that mean? The other Watson tilted its head again. Then, in a voice identical to mine, it said, It means you are already forgetting. A wave of nausea crashed over me. A terrible, unshakable sense of loss gnawed at the edges of my mind. I struggled to grasp something. A thought, a memory. But it was slipping. The name Edwin Vallance flickered in my mind like a guttering candle. Who was he? Why were we here? Holmes's voice cut through the fog gripping my thoughts. Watson, focus! I inhaled sharply. The momentary haze lifted, but only barely. Holmes's gaze never left the thing that had taken my form. You are interfering with our perception. Why? The thing's head tilted in the opposite direction. Then it stepped closer. Because, it whispered, you are not supposed to remember. And then it lunged. Holmes moved faster than thought. His hand shot out, grabbing my arm. yanking me backward just as the thing surged forward. The room twisted. The walls rippled like liquid. My vision blurred. And suddenly, we were no longer in the study. We were somewhere else, somewhere we had been before. Holmes and I stumbled back, and as I steadied myself, my breath caught. Because we were standing in the hallway again, the study was gone. The door, gone. The thing that had stolen my form, gone. Holmes exhaled, adjusting his coat. He glanced at me, his expression neutral, but I could see the sharpness in his gaze. "Watson," he murmured, "tell me, do you recall how we got here?" A fresh wave of horror slammed into me. I didn't. There was nothing, no memory of moving, no recollection of leaving the study. It was as though the last several seconds had been erased from existence. Holmes looked down at his hands, then back up at me. His next words were quiet, deliberate. "This house is not merely hiding the truth from us, Watson." He turned to face the darkened corridor ahead. "It is unmaking it." Chapter 9. We stood in the hallway, though I could not say how we had arrived there. The study, the impossible figure, the whispered warnings, all gone. The door we had entered through no longer existed, as though it had never been there at all. A hollow dread settled deep in my chest. My thoughts felt fragmented, as though something had reached into my mind and plucked out moments like loose threads from a tapestry. I turned to Holmes. He stood still, his sharp eyes scanning the corridor, his hands folded behind his back in a pose of deep contemplation. But even he, for the first time I had ever seen, looked uncertain. "Holmes," I murmured, my voice hoarse. "What in God's name is happening to us?" He did not answer immediately. Instead he knelt, running his gloved fingers along the floorboards, as though searching for something unseen. "Tell me, Watson," he said, "what do you remember of our first moments inside this house?" I exhaled slowly, trying to summon the memory. "We entered Carroll House. We walked down this corridor. We found the study. We saw—" I stopped. Holmes's gaze flicked to mine, expectant. I swallowed. "We saw a corpse, did we?" The question sent a shiver through me. I tried to recall Valance's lifeless face, the blooded shirt, but the details were slipping, just as before. Like a dream dissolving upon waking. I clenched my jaw. I refuse to believe that my own mind is deceiving me. Holmes studied me carefully. "It is not your mind that is at fault, Watson. It is the nature of this place." His voice was calm, but there was something in it that unsettled me. Holmes stood, dusting off his hands. "This house is not simply obscuring the truth. It is rewriting it in real time, erasing paths we have walked, decisions we have made, and most dangerously, altering what we perceive as fact." I felt my pulse quicken. "You're saying Carroll House is alive?" A pause. "Not alive, no," he murmured, "but it is being controlled." A sudden chill crept over me, though the air was still. "By whom?" Holmes exhaled sharply. "That is precisely what I intend to find out." A floorboard creaked behind us. I spun, revolver in hand, but the corridor stretched empty before me, an unbroken passage of shadow and gaslight. Yet the weight of something unseen pressed against my senses. I stepped closer to Holmes, lowering my voice. "We are being followed." Holmes nodded once. "That much is evident. The question is—" He turned suddenly, his keen eyes locked onto a single door at the far end of the hall. "Are we following them?" The door had not been there before. It should not have been there at all. And yet it was, a single wooden door, standing at the very end of a corridor that had previously led to nothing. A door that now waited for us. Holmes strode forward, his expression unreadable. "Holmes, wait!" I reached for him, but he was already pressing his palm against the door. It was unlocked. The latch clicked. The door swung inward, and what lay beyond should not have existed. I felt my breath catch as I stepped forward, my heart pounding, because we were no longer inside Carroll House. We had stepped into 221B Baker Street, our own sitting room. Holmes stopped just inside the threshold. The fire burned in the hearth. The scent of pipe smoke lingered in the air. Every detail was correct. My chair, his violin resting against the bookshelf, the newspaper I had left on the side table that morning. But something was wrong. Holmes turned, meeting my gaze. "This is not our home," he said quietly. My throat tightened. "Then what is it?" His gaze darkened. A memory, a terrible realization, unfurled in my mind. Carroll House was not simply erasing things, it was replacing them. Chapter 10. We stood in 221B Baker Street, or at least a perfect imitation of it. The room was warm, the fire crackling in the hearth. The familiar scent of tobacco clung to the air, curling from the very pipe Holmes had abandoned on the mantelpiece earlier that evening. Everything was as it should be, and yet nothing was right. I took a hesitant step forward, my boots clicking against the wooden floor. The sensation was deeply, fundamentally wrong. This place looked like our home, but something beneath the surface rebelled against it. Holmes, standing beside me, remained utterly still, his sharp eyes scanning every detail with the precision of a surgeon dissecting a patient. Then, without a word, he turned and strode toward his desk. I watched as he reached out and lifted a single sheet of paper from its surface. For a long moment, he simply stared at it. Then he turned it toward me. The words written across the page were in my own handwriting. "Dr. John H. Watson, you are not home. You have never been home. If you remember this, you must leave immediately, but do not trust Holmes." A violent chill crawled up my spine. My own signature rested at the bottom of the page, precise and unmistakable. Holmes said nothing, but his grip on the paper tightened slightly. I felt my breath quicken. "Holmes, I didn't write this." He did not look at me, and yet, here it is. I shook my head, stepping closer. "This isn't possible. If this is an illusion, a fabrication, then how—" Holmes lowered the paper. "Watson," he interrupted, his voice quiet, measured. "What is the last thing you clearly remember?" I opened my mouth, then froze. A creeping dread curled around my thoughts. I remembered arriving at Carroll House. I remembered the study, the impossible figure, the whisper that had spoken with my own voice. I remembered the knock on the door, and then nothing. My mind reached into an abyss where the last few minutes should have been. I exhaled slowly, my hands curling into fists. Holmes, something is happening to us. I am aware. His voice remained calm, but I could see the weight of his thoughts, calculating, assembling fragmented pieces of a puzzle that refused to take shape. A sudden sound broke the silence, the subtle scrape of a chair moving. We both turned toward the sitting area, and my blood turned to ice. Someone was sitting in my chair. I had not seen him there before, had not noticed, and yet he was there now, a man, slumped forward, his hands resting against his knees. The flickering firelight cast jagged shadows over his features. His face remained obscured until he shifted, and then, as he raised his head, I saw his face. I staggered back, because it was me, a perfect reflection of myself, sitting in my own chair, watching me. I choked out a breath, hand instinctively reaching for my revolver. Holmes? But Holmes was already stepping forward. The other Watson smiled. It was not a kind expression. It was hollow, empty. Then, in a voice that should not have existed, it whispered, "You were never supposed to see this." The lantern flickered, the walls bent, and suddenly, Baker Street was gone. We were back in Carroll House. Holmes and I stood in the middle of a vast empty chamber, one that should not have existed within the manor's structure. The walls stretched impossibly far, their darkened corners swallowing the dim light. The chair, the thing that had worn my face, was gone. Holmes inhaled slowly, adjusting his coat. He turned to me, studying my face. I swallowed hard. My skin felt cold, my hands trembling against my sides. Holmes, we are losing our grip on reality." For the first time, he did not disagree. Instead, his voice was softer than I had expected. "Then we must act quickly," he murmured. He turned, his sharp gaze locking onto a single doorway at the far end of the chamber, one we had not seen before. With the same certainty he carried in all things, he strode toward it, and, despite everything in my body screaming at me not to, I followed. Chapter 11. Holmes strode toward the doorway at the far end of the vast chamber, his pace unhurried yet deliberate. There was an unnatural stillness to the air, an absence of sound that made our footsteps feel intrusive. I followed, though every instinct in my body screamed against it. This was not how an investigation should unfold. There should have been evidence, logical deductions, rational explanations. But logic had begun to fray at the edges, and with every passing moment, reality seemed to twist further from our grasp. Holmes reached the door first. He did not open it immediately. Instead, he ran, his fingertips along the frame, his gaze sharp, analytical. "This door does not belong," he murmured. I exhaled sharply. "That much is evident." "No," Holmes said, shaking his head. "I mean that it should not be here, not within the architecture of this house." His fingers trailed along the surface of the wood. "The construction is different. The grain is inconsistent with the era, and yet—" He stepped back, his gaze darkening. "It is old, older than the house itself." A cold shiver ran through me. Holmes reached for the handle. I found myself tensing. "Holmes," I said cautiously, "what if—" But before I could finish, he pushed it open. What lay beyond was impossible. Not another room, not another corridor, Nothing. A vast, boundless void stretched before us, an expanse of darkness so complete that it swallowed all light. The air seemed heavier here, pressing against my skin, making each breath feel shallow. Holmes tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. Curious? Curious? It was horrifying. I swallowed, forcing my voice steady. Where does it lead? Holmes did not answer. Instead, he reached into his coat, producing a single match. With a flick, he struck it against the doorframe, letting the flame burn bright. Then, without hesitation, he dropped it into the void. I watched, breathless, as the tiny flame plummeted, only to vanish. No smoke, no embers, no impact. The match had ceased to exist. Holmes hummed in thought. Fascinating. I tore my gaze from the abyss. Holmes, for God's sake, step away from it. He glanced at me, a flicker of something in his expression. Not fear, not hesitation, something deeper. I believe we are standing at the threshold of complete erasure, he murmured. I clenched my jaw. Then we should not linger. Holmes exhaled through his nose, stepping back from the doorway. Agreed. As he did, the door slammed shut on its own. A gust of air rushed past us as the latch clicked into place. And then the walls shifted. Chamber was no longer a chamber. We stood in a different room now, one that had appeared without transition. A study, old, dust-covered, books stacked haphazardly on the shelves, papers scattered across a wooden desk, and there, upon the desk, a single open journal. Holmes moved first, approaching it with measured steps. I followed, my breath tight in my chest. Journal's pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded, but the words were still legible. Holmes read aloud, to those who find this, "If you are reading these words, then you have stepped into what was never meant to be seen. This house does not belong to any time, nor any reality. It is an error, a fracture in the fabric of memory. There is no solving this mystery. There is only escaping it." Holmes's voice grew quieter as he reached the final line. "But if you stay too long, you will forget that you ever tried to leave." I shuddered. Holmes closed the journal. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Watson, we need to leave, now." Chapter 12, Holmes's words sent a cold shiver through me. "We need to leave, now." Something in his tone, calm, yet carrying an urgency I rarely heard, made the weight of our situation fully settle upon me. The reality we stood in, if it could even be called that, was coming apart. And if we lingered, we might never return to what was real. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. Then let's not waste another moment. Holmes nodded once and turned toward the door. I followed, my boots pressing against the dust-laden floor as we moved swiftly across the study. Holmes reached for the handle and froze. The door, which had been there mere moments ago, was gone. Not locked, not hidden, simply gone. A cold weight settled in my stomach. Holmes? He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping the study. I could see the gears turning in his mind, calculations running through that brilliant brain of his. "This house," he murmured, "is not merely shifting, it is responding." A creeping sensation crawled along my spine. Responding to what? Holmes exhaled sharply. To us, to our actions, to our attempts to leave. I clenched my fists. Then we force our way out. There must be another door, a window. I turned toward the nearest wall, where a large grimy window had been just a moment before. It, too, was gone. I spun back to Holmes, but he was already moving. Without hesitation, he strode toward the bookshelves, running his hands along the spines, testing their weight. His sharp gaze flicked over every surface, searching for something unseen. Then he paused. He reached out, brushing his fingers along the edge of a leather-bound book. And then, with great deliberation, he pulled it from the shelf. A mechanical click echoed through the room. The bookshelf shifted, not like a hidden passage sliding open, but rather like an illusion unravelling. The wall flickered. The bookshelves warped, distorting as though they had never truly been there in the first place. And then a new doorway materialized before us. Holmes turned to me, his eyes sharp. "We move quickly, Watson." I didn't need to be told twice. Together, we stepped through the doorway and into madness. We were not in Carroll House anymore. The corridor that greeted us stretched into infinity, lined with doors that did not belong. Some were mismatched, as if stolen from different centuries. A grand Victorian entryway stood beside a rusted iron hatch. A child's bedroom door sat beside an ancient oak archway, and the corridor itself, it did not end. Holmes studied the passage carefully, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. We are walking through a construct of fragmented realities. I swallowed hard. And how do we escape it? Holmes glanced at me, his gaze unreadable. Then he strode forward. We find the door that does not belong. With no better option, I followed. As we walked, my mind fought against the sheer impossibility of our surroundings. The doors pulsed faintly, as though they were not physical objects but memories given shape. The very air crackled with something unnatural, something that did not wish to be understood. Then, without warning, Holmes stopped. His eyes fixed on a door near the end of the corridor. At first, it looked unremarkable. Plain wood, a simple brass handle. But as I stepped closer, a strange sensation gripped me. I knew this door. I had seen it before, and yet I had never seen it in my life. Holmes reached for the handle. The moment his fingers touched it, the entire corridor shook. A sound, low and rumbling like a great exhalation, passed through the space. The air thickened, the walls bent inward, and then a whisper. You were never meant to leave. The voice did not belong to anyone. It belonged to everything. Holmes did not hesitate. He turned the handle, the door swung open, and suddenly we were standing outside. Carroll House was gone. Whitechapel's fog-laden streets stretched before us, the gaslights flickering in the early morning haze. A horse-drawn carriage rattled past. The distant hum of London's waking city pulsed through the air, as if we had never been inside at all. I inhaled sharply, my mind struggling to reconcile the shift. Holmes! He stood beside me, adjusting his coat. His gaze flicked toward where the house had once been. Except there was nothing there. No grand manor. No remnants of a ruined house. Just an empty lot, overgrown with weeds, as if nothing had stood there for decades. A deep silence passed between us. Then, at last, Holmes turned to me. "Watson," he said evenly, "what do you remember of the last hour?" My breath caught. The memories were already slipping. Not entirely, but like something half-remembered from a dream, dissolving at the edges. The horror, the corridors, the thing that wore my face. It was all fading. I met Holmes's gaze, my voice hollow. "It's disappearing," Holmes inhaled slowly. Then, almost absently, he reached into his coat pocket. His fingers closed around something. He pulled it free, a scrap of paper. He unfolded it. His sharp eyes flicked over the words. His jaw tightened. I stepped closer. "Holmes, what is it?" He handed it to me. It was aged, yellowed, the ink smudged. But the words were clear. A note written in my own handwriting. Dr. John H. Watson. If you are reading this, then you escaped, but you were never meant to. Forget everything, forget Carol, house, and whatever you do, do not return. I felt my breath leave me. I looked up at Holmes. His expression remained carefully neutral. "What do we do now?" I asked. He looked back at the empty lot, the place where the house had once stood, the place where it had never been. His answer was quiet. "We go home, Watson." And with that, Holmes turned and began walking. I followed. Neither of us looked back, and by the time we reached Baker Street, I had already begun to forget. Chapter 4. The 13 bit. By the time we reached 221B Baker Street, the night had fully lifted, giving way to the grey haze of a London morning, the rhythmic clatter of hooves against cobblestone, the distant hum of conversation. The world had returned to normal, or rather, it appeared that way. Holmes entered first, shedding his coat with a swift motion before striding toward his desk. He did not sit. He stood by the window, his sharp gaze fixed on the streets below, lost in thought. I followed, closing the door behind me. The familiar warmth of our sitting room should have been comforting, yet an unease still lingered in my bones, a sense that something remained unfinished. Holmes had not spoken since we left Whitechapel. That, in itself, unsettled me. I cleared my throat. "Holmes, what do we remember?" He exhaled, a slow, deliberate breath. Enough. That was not an answer. I moved to the armchair, rubbing my temples as I forced my mind to hold on to the events of Carroll House. But the more I tried, the more they slipped away, like ink in water, dissolving before I could capture their shape. I recalled fragments, pieces, a letter, a man who had been erased, a house that should not have existed. And then, nothing. A deep unease curled within me. "Holmes, it's disappearing, isn't it?" He turned then, finally looking at me. His gaze was unreadable, but I saw the sharpness behind his eyes, the battle against something intangible. "Yes," he admitted, "it is vanishing from our minds piece by piece." I set my jaw. "Then we must write it down, now, before it's lost completely." Holmes studied me for a long moment. Then, with measured steps, he retrieved his notebook from the desk. He opened it, poised his pen, and stopped. I frowned. "Holmes?" He hesitated, just for a second. Then he pressed the tip of the pen against the page and began to write. But as I watched, the ink bled into nothingness. The letters he formed, they did not remain. I sucked in a sharp breath as I saw it happening. The words fading even as he wrote them. The lines dissolving as though the very act of remembering was being rejected by reality itself. Holmes, ever unshakable, remained composed. He simply watched as the ink disappeared, his expression unreadable. Finally, he set the pen down. As I suspected, I gripped the arms of my chair. We cannot record it. Holmes leaned back slightly, considering. No, whatever force governed, Carroll House did not merely seek to erase evidence of its existence. It ensured that even the memory of it could not persist. A hollow silence settled between us. Then Holmes did something I had not expected. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew the note we had found at the empty lot. The note in my own handwriting, the one that had warned us not to return. Holmes unfolded it carefully. The paper was aged, worn at the edges. He held it up to the light. The words remained. I exhaled slowly. Why hasn't that vanished? Holmes tapped the page with a single finger. Because it was written within Carroll House's influence. It is not merely a record. It is a fragment of whatever force governs that place. I shuddered. And what does that mean? Holmes folded the paper once more. It means, Watson, that whatever is attempting to erase this mystery— He met my gaze, his expression unreadable. Has already failed. I did not ask what he meant. Not then, because at that moment something else unsettled me far more. As I sat there, staring at my own handwriting on that note, I realized I had no memory of ever writing it. The final traces of Carroll House were already slipping from my mind, and deep down I knew that soon there would be nothing left of it at all. Nothing except a single chilling thought. There was something we were never meant to remember, and perhaps we never had. The end.